Hey y'all, this is Brown at I Have Brown, and I wanted to talk a little bit about some things I found out about Tobe Hooper in the process of doing some research on him when I was doing the reviews for Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Eaten Alive. And some of the things I found out were more than a little fascinating, because he was attached to various projects throughout his career, but some of these projects ended up falling through completely, but others he was in the process of working on them, but then for one reason or another was let go or fired. But some of the stuff I'm about to mention here, I mean, if you're in the horror scene or if you follow the horror scene, you might already know about it. But for me personally, I mean, this was new stuff entirely. But okay, so his third theatrical film was going to be a movie called The Dark, and this was going to be a straight up horror film. And the original idea for it was going to be about this guy who had been horribly abused as a child, and he was also autistic. And so basically his parents they took out their frustrations on him and just horribly abused him and kept him locked in his bedroom for the majority of his life. And that was basically all the guy ends up knowing. I mean, that's his world. But then one day the house burns down, and if I remember correctly, the parents end up dying in the fire. But while everything is destroyed, this guy ends up surviving the fire and ends up basically taking out his anger and rage on the world around him, namely anyone who crosses his path. He ends up going after and killing, because that's the only way he, in his mind, he can get back at the world for hurting him. And so that was the original idea for the movie. And there are a couple of interviews that if you look around online, there were some interviews with Tobe Hooper, from around this time period where he's in the process of working on the movie, and he sounds very enthusiastic about it. And someone else who brought these articles up, was mentioning that Tobe Hooper in interviews is usually very reserved, but in these interviews for the movie The Dark in particular, I mean, you got the impression that this was something that he was excited to be working on. He was really passionate about it. But what ended up happening, was, I mean, a number of things. But the main thing was that this was 1979, and Ridley Scott's Alien had come out. And Alien has gone down, and rightfully so, to be regarded as one of the best science fiction horror films ever made, and one of the scariest movies ever made too. And so when the producers of The Dark saw how successful this science fiction and horror combination was, they decided to change up some things about The Dark to bring a sci-fi angle into it. And so they ended up butting heads with Tobe Hooper, because he was like, hey, this isn't the movie I'm wanting to make. I'm wanting to make this one about the autistic serial killer. But they fired him though, and they gave a couple of reasons, but one of them was that he was running behind, because he had already done some pre-production stuff, but in terms of actual shooting, he, I believe, was on he had done 3 or 4 days worth of filming, and then they fired him. And so depending on who you talk to, I mean, the producers and what have you, they said that oh, he was going too slow for our tastes, and so we brought in someone who was faster. And they brought in this other guy, and I forgot his name, but this other guy ended up directing the actual movie. And they basically filmed a couple of scenes that emphasized the sci-fi angle of the horror, and then they just totally redid the story. And I haven't seen the movie, but apparently the killer though is now this sort of rotted, green-looking zombie, dude who blasts people with his eye beams, or these eye beams. Like, he'll look at them, and then these orange eye beams come out and blow you up. But apparently, these eye beams were basically drawn in some cases at the last minute. And and if you look at it on screen, like if you look at the trailers and what have you, I mean, it just, it looks kind of ridiculous. I mean, I say this way, I haven't seen the movie, but I've seen the trailer for The Dark. But yeah, and some of the people that were involved in the movie, like namely some of the actors, I think William Devane was one of them, but don't quote me on that. But if he's the one I'm thinking of, I mean, he was, really frustrated with the whole thing because, he signed on to the movie because he really wanted to work with Tobe Hooper because he was a huge fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so when Tobe Hooper was fired like 3 or 4 days into shooting, William Devane was, pretty pissed off because, I mean, it's like, hey, this is why I signed on the movie, and now you just kicked him out. And so the new director, he has sit down, with the actor and assured him that, hey, we'll still have your same lines and everything. We're changing up some other things about the movie, but we're going to keep your character and lines intact. So, you play the lines however you want to play them. And that was kind of like, his compensation, so to speak. But, yeah, the movie, I don't remember how well it did financially, but critically, though, it didn't do well. And, like, if you look on IMDb, the rating's pretty low, and, a lot of other people who have reviewed the movie, they don't really have, positive things to say about it. But I remember, though, seeing a couple of pictures recently wherein you see, like, the director, not Tobe Hooper, but the other director they brought in, standing side by side with the actor who's playing the monster / killer. And it's a black and white picture, and the killer, the actor, like, he's made up to look sort of disheveled and grimy. And if you look at him, even say in color pictures, like in stills, though, I mean, the way he's sort of a greenish looking, or rotted in some shots, depending on the lighting, I mean, that does kind of go in line with the original idea of him, being, say, locked up in his bedroom for, Lord knows how many years, and then, being, dirty and unkempt, and then, surviving the fire, which destroyed his home and killed his parents. And so, in some of the stills, I mean, the killer does look like he's, survived a fire, like he's been, mildly burned or something like that. Like, not like, say, Freddy Krueger burned or anything, but just it looks like, he's been through a fire at some point. And especially in that one still where he's standing the actor who's playing the killer is standing side by side with the director. And so, I mean, with that in mind, and then seeing, like, say, the theatrical trailer where you see, him, blasting people with these eye beams, I mean, you feel like there was a missed opportunity there. At least I felt like there was a missed opportunity there because, this could have been, I mean, at this point, I mean, one, this would have been Tobe Hooper's third movie had he been able to stay on as director, and two, had they stayed with the original idea with, the autistic serial killer, I mean, that could have been, a rather unique entry in the slasher genre of horror. I mean, because imagine, say, a serial killer with, a mental condition that the audience, kind of sees the world from his perspective. And I mean, you saw hints of that with the character of Leatherface, I mean, in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, because there's that, I mean, there are a couple of scenes where, it's made clear that he's mentally challenged, right? But I mean, there's that one darkly comical moment where, he's running back and forth in the house freaking out because, these people keep coming in, and he keeps killing them, and they keep coming in, and he's like, what the hell's going on, And you even see a glimpse of that with the character of Judd in Eaten Alive. And I didn't think Eaten Alive was that good of a movie, but I mean, there were moments where the actor who played him, Neville Brand, did a good job of giving you a glimpse of, you know, how Judd saw the world. And so if Tobe Hooper had been allowed to do the dark, as, you know, he had originally wanted to, I mean, as well as, you know, how the people who came up with the story had originally wanted to do it, that would have been a fascinating movie, I think. I don't know if it would have been good, but it would have been interesting at least. I mean, it would have been, you know, a unique entry in the horror genre, at least in my opinion, as it was described, you know, as the story originally was described. But as it actually came out, it just, you know, didn't work out from what I understand. And if you see the theatrical trailer, I mean, it just looks kind of cheesy, like with the acting and everything. So yeah, it just, what could have been, right? But another thing about it was that prior to the dark being made, I mean, this was at the point where they'd come up with the story idea, you know, about the autistic serial killer. Someone actually put out a novelization for it, you know, for that particular version of the movie. And this is before the producers came in and changed it to, you know, something totally different, where, you know, it was suddenly a sci-fi horror movie. But I don't remember who the author was, I'm sorry to say. But yeah, I just now I'm kind of interested, you know, to see if anyone who follows the horror scene, you know, has read the book or read that particular adaptation, and, you know, if they know whether or not it was any good. Because I mean, you know, it sounds like that, you know, would give you a glimpse at what could have been on screen, you know. So okay, so the other thing about Tobe Hooper that I found out was that amongst many other movies that he was initially attached to, but, you know, ended up being either let go, or just, you know, the projects ended up falling through, he was involved with the Cannon Group in the mid 80s, like in 1985 and 1986. You know, Golan-Globus, you know, they did a lot of you know, B movies, like a lot of ninja movies, a lot of Charles Bronson and Chuck Norris movies, and a few breakdancing movies here and there. And they also did Masters of the Universe, where Dolph Lundgren was He-Man and Frank Langella was Skeletor. And also there was the Jean-Claude Van Damme post-apocalyptic movie, Cyborg. And you know, I mean, so there was definitely some familiar movies that came out of the Cannon Group, you know, like as far as, you know, pop culture goes. I mean, you know, mainstream audiences, I mean, have at some point seen something from the Cannon Group. I mean, okay, the Delta Force, you know, Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin. But yeah, I mean, if you're wanting to see, like, say, the creme de la creme of the Cannon Group, I mean, there was a movie called Runaway Train, which had John Voight and Eric Roberts and Rebecca De Mornay, and that was a fantastic movie. And in fact, it even got nominated for Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. You know, Best Actor John Voight, Best Supporting Actor Eric Roberts, and so deservedly so as well. So if you want to see what the Cannon Group was capable of when everything was firing on all cylinders, check out Runaway Train. But for the most part, though, movies like Runaway Train were kind of the exception to the rule, because for the most part, the output was, you know, in the realm of, you know, B-movie cinema. But Tobe Hooper, though, signed a 3-movie contract with them, and, you know, the movies he ended up doing were Life Force and Invaders from Mars. It was a remake of the original, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And personally, I thought all 3 movies were pretty cool, you know. But unfortunately, they did not do well critically or financially at the time they came out. But as time's gone on over the years, all 3 movies have been reappraised by audiences and critics alike. And, you know, a lot of people think that the movies kind of got a raw deal. I mean, Life Force especially, because, you know, you look at that movie and the budget it had was like $25 million. And, this coming from the Cannon Group, this was the most expensive, feature that they had ever done at that point. But unfortunately, as far as box office goes, the movie only made somewhere like between 11 and $12 million, I think. So unfortunately, that plus the critical reception wasn't so warm either. But later on, though, the director's cut became available, and that's oftentimes what was, front and center on the DVDs. Like, say, the original DVD that what came out for Life Force. I mean, the sort of bare bones DVD, and then even say the special edition. So, with the director's cut, you watch that and you compare it to the theatrical version, and you're kind of like, they should have gone with the director's cut. So anyway, though, Tobe Hooper actually did those 3 movies: Life Force, Invaders from Mars, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. But one of the movies that he was attached to and that, he was going to be directing was a science fiction version of Pinocchio, of all things. So we're talking, a guy who's mainly known for almost exclusively, his work in horror, taking a shot at doing, a family-friendly, kids movie. And so, I mean, that would have been really interesting to see, because another thing, you look around online and you look up, Tobe Hooper, Pinocchio, or the Cannon Group Pinocchio, and you'll be able to find, an advertisement for it with, say, I think it was like in a trade magazine specifically for the Cannon Group, and you see like, an advertisement for Pinocchio, and it says coming soon, and then who's involved in making the movie. But there's also a black and white piece of artwork which served as a piece of promotional art for the movie, and you see Geppetto building what looks like an android of a young child, that looks like a young child, and like the body's a robot. I mean, it's clearly mechanical, but the head looks very human. And then you also see this one little robot sort of hovering around, kind of helping Geppetto out. And it was a pretty cool piece of artwork, and it kind of gave you a glimpse of what they were wanting to go for with that movie. And Tobe Hooper, I mean, he was going to be directing it, and Lee Marvin was going to be playing Geppetto. Okay, now, I mean, Lee Marvin, the guy from The Dirty Dozen, and the man who shot Liberty Valance. I mean, I would have loved to have seen that. But also, Dan O'Bannon and Don Jacoby were going to be the screenwriters, and both of those guys had worked with Tobe Hooper on Life Force, so there definitely would have been some familiar camaraderie there between the 3 of them, I think, had they been able to work on this movie together. But yeah, unfortunately though, Pinocchio was never made, because one of the downsides of the Cannon Group was that a good amount of the time was one of the things that they did was that they would pitch movies, right, and advertise and put out advertisements for movies that they hadn't even made yet. I mean, like, maybe there was a loose story idea, but they would then, like, say, take this loose story idea and then pitch it with, say, like a piece of artwork, and then once, I guess, distributors and other people actually got interested, then they're like, okay, now we actually have to come up with a story for this darn thing. So I found that out when I watched a documentary about the Cannon Group, and I think it was called Electric Boogaloo: The Wild Times of the Cannon Group, or something like that. Definitely worth checking out, though. But some of the people that were involved in working with the Cannon Group, like, say, actors and other people behind the scenes, one of the things they said about the Cannon Group was, in fact, that several times they would pitch a movie when there wasn't even a full script in the can yet, like just maybe a couple of ideas for the story and some artwork. But But yeah, Pinocchio, I think, was one of those movies, unfortunately, that they had, some artwork for it, maybe a loose idea. I can't find anything about, like, say, what the exact story would have been. Maybe I'm, just not looking in the right places. But yeah, so Pinocchio, directed by Tobe Hooper, ended up falling through entirely. But in the advertisements, though, it's advertised for somewhere between 1985 and 1986. So this would have been the same time frame as when Tobe Hooper was working on Life Force, Invaders from Mars, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. So yeah, I don't know, like, how much impact the poor reception of say, like, Life Force or the other two movies would have had, because when Life Force bombed, the budgets for Invaders from Mars and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 were slashed, by the producers, because, I mean, they already sank a boatload of money into Life Force, and when that bombed, they're like, okay, we don't want to throw as much money around this time. So that's where, Invaders from Mars and Texas Chainsaw Massacre unfortunately took a hit. Like, they're still cool movies, but when you find out about some things that could have been, you're kind of like, man, if they just had that budget, So unfortunately, I think, Pinocchio, had they made it, while it would have been fascinating to see, and I'm sure Lee Marvin would have given a good performance as Geppetto, I think that some of the stuff they may have wanted to do, special effects wise, they may not have been able to pull off, because maybe the budget would have been slashed at that point. So anyway, what could have been, right? So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. I thought some of y'all might find that of interest, especially those who follow the horror scene. And yeah, thanks for taking the time to listen. And y'all like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. And y'all have a good day. Take care. Bye.